LinkedIn, what's going on? Happy Tuesday. This is your boy, Scott Garber, coming to you doing something that we've never done before on ChekPoint. Today, I am actually going to be in the other seat, and my friend and just friend that I met on LinkedIn is actually going to be driving the show today. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Mr. Bill Davis to the screen. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you. It's a little chilly in New York City, but besides that, it's another beautiful day in paradise. How we
Boy,
doing?
I tell you, before I give you the reins to drive this show, and I got to tell you that I am so excited and humbled. 2020 has been a really interesting and crazy year. But one of the cool things is really embracing this digital environment where you get to meet unique individuals that you probably wouldn't cross paths with if you were just running and gunning in your normal day. And so I had the fortune of meeting Bill, a few months ago now. And, on the last comment or on the last post, he said, "What if I drove the show?" And I was like, man, I don't think I could think of anybody better. So, Bill, I am passing the baton over to you. Let's jump into ChekPoint, my man.
Well, listen, thank you very much. I want everyone to know that this wasn't about me wanting to drive as much as it was me observing what the show was like, the energy you brought to the table. Very often you are conscientious of who you're speaking to on the other side, and you want to give them an opportunity to tell their stories. And I'm like, the gentleman that I met, the Scott that I met, you've got an interesting story to tell as well. So I think your audience deserves the opportunity to hear that. So we want to unpack a little about that. So the theme of this conversation, because we met through athletic, professional athlete connections, is the unpacking the genius of the athlete. To give you a little background about me, I'm the exact opposite. I'm not that genius or that athlete. Played a little sports when I was younger, got injured very early on. And from there, went through academia, started working in artificial intelligence, and got very, very fortunate, ran a tech company and then a small investment bank and a family office. And effectively now I run a small family office, a boutique family office for athletes, artists, celebrities, influencers, representing first generation wealth. And what I found, particularly with the athletes that are in the world today, unlike the day of yore when there was this stigma about being a dumb athlete, et cetera, is that most of the athletes that I've met, those that I've gone through academia with, those that I've worked with, are just absolutely genius. And unfortunately, most of the world doesn't understand that. So we want to explore that a little bit. To give you an example of what that looked like, we had an incident earlier this year where LeBron James, who, regardless of what your opinion of him is, whether or not you're a fan or whether or not you don't like what he represents, but the point is that he's had some success in the NBA and outside of it. But the challenge that he received, which was, I thought, out of line, was when he spoke about his feelings around a political issue. There was an anchor of Fox News by the name of Laura Ingraham that told him specifically, and she's done this with other athletes and other scenarios as well, to him, for he just needs to shut up and dribble. And that created a little hysteria around, what is she really saying? The questions, is that racist? Is that sexist? Is it anti-sports? What are you really saying? Is that as an athlete, you don't have an opportunity to share your opinion about what's going on in the world? And I think she had a different perspective. But at the end of the day, what I think we want to understand is that some of these athletes are super duper. And in the case of a LeBron James and Michael Jordan and other at the top of the pyramid, we're talking to people that have earned $1 billion in earnings, that are investing in hospitality, sports, entertainment, digital media, electronics, and will break all types of not only athletic records, but as an athlete, he may be the first sitting athlete to earn $1 billion as while he's still an athlete outside of his athletic endeavors. So I think that's absolutely interesting. So Scott, I want to talk with you because I know you've been in the locker room before. You have a history of athletics. You have incredible relationships and you interview athletes all the time. What do you think about that whole concept of shut up and dribble?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and a great time to be talking about it, right? I mean, one of the, we're all going through COVID together, and 2020 has presented a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities, and I think this is a breakthrough year for athletes, both on the court and overcoming those adversities, whether the court, field, rink, etc., or off of it, right? And really showing that, hey, this is one mountain that I'm climbing, but life is a mountain range, right? So I'm preparing myself for my endeavors that are going to follow my athletic career. So before I dive into that answer, I've had the fortune of interviewing over 65 athletic directors, professional athletes, Olympians, Super Bowl champions. Bill, the common thread across all of them is the game is won right here. Right? The game is won and the conditioning is done, the 6 inches between your ears. And that's the real estate that is so precious. And I think athletes do a great job of illustrating that through their sport, through their discipline, through all the soft skills that we're going to talk about today, which ultimately prepare them to be really productive, high producers when they get into the quote unquote real world. So I'm going to go ahead and take a step back and sort of tell my journey because it's really interesting. So I grew up a football player, hockey player, soccer player. I mean, pretty much, man, if it had a ball, puck, stick, I was there. I was a bull in a china shop kind of kid. But funny enough, I didn't pick up a football until my freshman year of high school. Wasn't a sport that I played. It was one of those where I was like, you know what, Dad, like maybe I'll go into high school, I'll join the freshman football team. I tried out as a linebacker, Bill. I was like, man, I've never tackled anything in my life,
Were you like what were you like, $140?
Man, I was, come on, Bill. I had an appetite at that point, man. I was probably about $160. They wanted to put me on the line. and so I get up, I show up to high school, make the freshman team as a linebacker, and a couple weeks before the season kicked off, the punter for the varsity team actually sucker punched the head coach. It was the craziest thing, but I was actually the punter for the freshman team too. And so I got that phone call, Scott, you're coming up to varsity. Bill, you can't make this up. My first punt, the snap went over my head. I pick it up. I have no clue what I'm doing. I kick the ball. It lands down on the 2-yard line. And at this point, I don't even know, man, did I do something good? Like, I really wasn't even a football player, And so that was my intro into sport or into organized football. And, I took it and ran with it, man. I mean, freshman year was just really one of those where I was feeling it out. Sophomore year, I figured out I was decent at this. And then the floodgates opened, started going to national combines and ended up parting ways with high school with about a dozen offers. Had a couple verbal commitment or a verbal commitment that went sideways. And then, that's really where the magic started to happen for me was, man, just because you have a vision doesn't always mean that's how reality is going to play out. So I think one of the biggest things when we talk about the 6 inches here is the ability to fail forward. And that's one of the things that athletics teaches, high performing athletes or really anybody that plays the sport, because we all embrace failure. We all encounter failure. How you deal with that will determine, sort of the next move in your journey. So I only say that because I had an incredible opportunity fall in my lap. South Alabama was starting a football program in 2009. I get the phone call. It says, Scott, he said, we got a full ride scholarship and we play University of Tennessee in 5 years. If you're willing to come here and build with us, it's going to be something that you'll never forget. So Bill Davis, I took my ass I was actually at a visit in Wisconsin and went down to Mobile, Alabama. And that's where all the magic happened, man. So
wow.
Really, really cool. And I'm excited to get into the shut up and dribble, right? Because at the end of the day, each athlete has their own journey. Right? And usually we see athletes in two different buckets, as this is the vehicle to get me there or the vehicle to get me out, right? And so I think that depending on where you were at in your upbringing and how sports were brought into your life, that determines the mindset of the athlete. But nonetheless, it's a grind mentality. But so much energy is focused from the grade school level up to the college level just on the athletics. And so I think that it's more incumbent upon us to have a more holistic environment and educate athletes holistically at a young age and hold them accountable for all of these different things that they might get a pass for because they are good on the court, rink, or field, and really level the playing field as humans. So I think it's just as much a responsibility of society to say, hey, you're a great athlete, and we're going to put you on that pedestal, but not all the way, because at the end of the day, they're just people too, right? So that's one side of the fence. And then the other is the reality. And we have put athletes on the pedestal, and we have elevated everything around these athletes to be very professional. But for so long, we never elevated the athlete to go ahead and do the professionalism with it. And so, you almost go through this journey from high school to college where you're an amateur and you don't earn. And then it's like you're supposed to turn on the pump and become a professional overnight. Well, that's not how this works. So I think so much of it is preparation around mentality and mindset, and making sure that when these athletes get that platform that they have, that they're viewed as a person and not just an athlete.
Very interesting. So you created an opportunity to segue into a couple of pieces. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about that vision, and where the vision has been exploited, and we hear a lot about, is with a Michael Jordan and a Kobe Bryant, who both shared the same trainer. And the trainer has gone on to publish material and talk about what that greatness looked like and how they built it. And very often it was through them having a visualization of what success looked like. Clearly, there was the work ethic. Clearly, there was a little bit more as well, but they were able to visualize literally what that journey looks like and what the success looked like at the end of the journey.
Mm.
I'm going to postulate that that is not only a technique and a skill set, but there's something innate with that. And I want to believe that something is built into the DNA that allows that execution to occur. And in my humble opinion, that is the genius that we see first manifest in the athlete on the court. But I would argue, even if they never participated in sports, there still would have been an Air Jordan. There still would have been a venture capital firm that Kobe ran. There still would have been an advocate for female sports that Kobe brought to the table after the fact as well.
Mm.
So I'm trying to understand, have you noticed anything else about particularly these superstar athletes, and not in their performance, but in terms of their preparation, their mindset, the glow that's tied to them, that you can tell that they're special and that they're going to do something special?
Yeah, that's a great. So I believe that you're the sum of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And it's no coincidence that these folks that we talk about, the Jordans, the Kobes, the Gretzkys, the Dan Marinos of the world, had really strong supporting cast around them, and they had really good coaching, right? And so I think that it takes a very unique individual to be in that environment and be coachable and malleable to a point that you can't take there or get to by yourself. So I think that it is just as much about creating the tribe around you as it is honing in on those innate abilities that you're able to go ahead and capitalize on. Now I'm going to go back to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to sort of the 6 inches between the ears here, right? Because a lot of those people that you just mentioned, they're very present. They're right where their feet are throughout the journey. And so if they lean on those coaches to push them outside of their comfort zone where they see that, they can take it one step further. But MJ, man, when you watch that documentary, I mean, the guy is an uber competitor. He is right there for every single shot, every moment of practice. But is MJ where he's at without a Phil Knight? Right? Like, I mean, these people that really just extract it. So I think that, partnerships have become one of the most beautiful things that we're embracing in 2020, because let's face it, capital's squeezing. So we're having to get creative in the way we leverage other assets. And those guys would have partnerships with their coaches to push them and squeeze every bit of juice out of that orange to get maximum productivity. And so, it's one of those things that, I see so many athletes, and I talk to so many athletes like, hey, I was really coachable on the field. Awesome. Who's your coach in the real world? Bill, they look at me like I have 15 heads, like, oh, I don't have a coach in this arena. And so I think that's one of the pitfalls that we do in the transition, is not continuing to find and put people around us that are supportive of us, that are really pushing us to be better. Instead, I think we attract leeches, right? You make money and people come out of the woodworks and they want to suck on the money, or they want the fame. But as soon as that goes away or the injury happens, well, now you're back by yourself. So again, I sort of go back to that more holistic education approach, so you can strategically place people around you that genuinely have your best interest at heart.
So that's the second segue, and that's a very good point. So like you said, because of the competitive nature and the ecosystem that's needed to create that winning champion superstar athlete, very often they're 100+% focused on the task, their skill set, the tools, the learnings around all of that, and really don't have an opportunity to look beyond that moment, because if they look beyond that moment, they'll miss that moment. And in order for them to be successful, like you said, there's an entire ecosystem. There's teams of coaches and trainers and everything from housing and food. All of these things are taken care of. But what happens when that athletic journey ends, that team dissipates. And as a result, they find themselves for their very first time entering into the next stage of life without a team, without a coach, without a trainer, etc. Now, to what we're attempting to do in a fragmented manner, yourself with your platform, me with the family office that I'm running, and also our partner over at the Win Again platform, what we're doing effectively is trying to create that team. It's fragmented right now, so that they have a training and a thought and a guidance on what the next stages can be, how they leverage their personal brands, how they utilize the resources that ideally they still have if they've earned enough and it hasn't been spoiled. One of the biggest challenges that they have very often, the people very much closest to them, sometimes have taken advantage of their generosity, their commitments to community, etc. And there's almost a legacy expectation. You're the breadwinner for all of us in this community. You representing all of us, so you need to take care of all of us. And many athletes have gone broke even after earning $100 million trying to do that. So now effectively, we've got to create the new team with the new opportunities and leveraging that tool set that they need to kind of redevelop or take off from where they left off. But I also see that there's a genius and they have an opportunity to leapfrog what a lot of other people would have to do, leveraging the assets and the goodwill and the resources they built in the same while they were athletes in the same time.
Well, Bill, think about this, to interrupt real quick. Right? So this is really interesting because we're at a transition point of athletes, and me and you, as we came up, you could never earn on your name, image, and likeness because of amateurism. So now, that was coming regardless of COVID or not. Now the two together has created not a one-lane highway, but a 4-lane highway of opportunity to go downstream and actually be proactive and teach athletes how to do these, or how to surround yourself with the right people off the field, how to leverage the team and the brand that you're associated with at that time. And actually, that's the power. No one cares about Scott Garber just when I'm done playing football, but you cared about me when I was, even if I was the punter, when I was at South Alabama or LSU or the Cowboys or the Rangers. And so I think it's really cool that we're completely flipping the paradigm on its head and saying, hey, you have your own story to tell. Now you have a tool to do it. So there's no reason that you can't get educated in financial literacy, in how to position yourself in taxes, etc. So I think that this is one of the most opportunistic times for athletes to really level the playing field and be a real business partner in the sports industry as we go forward.
Great. We're going to put that in the parking lot because we're going to close with that. We definitely want to drill deeper into NIL, what that means, and how to prepare for that, particularly for the young athlete that has infinite amount of opportunity if they prepare appropriately. In the meantime, I want to think about, though, in terms of the athletes that you know that in your ecosystem that you've interviewed, that you're working with.
Yep.
Again, this notion that I'm going to, and you'll hear me support probably through infinity, is there's this genius inside of the athlete that's manifest physically on the field, but that genius will be manifest in any environment that they enter. And to give you an example of that, we think back to the days of the New York Knicks, and there's a gentleman by the name of Bill Bradley that was very a significant part of their championship years. And he became Senator Bill Bradley. And one of the things that Phil Jackson said, if I remember correctly, was that when they met Phil Jackson, and certainly Walt Clyde Frazier said the same thing as well, they knew that Bill Bradley was going to be a senator. Even as a kid that's shooting jump shots, they're like, he's going to be a senator. They can see that it was built into his DNA. I mean, some of the great players out of Syracuse, Dave Bing has run one of the biggest steel companies, Bing Steel, in after his career was over with. One of my partners, Rashad McCants, had won a championship in North Carolina, played a few years in the NBA. Now he's unpacking a genius of AR and VR. His visualizations are beyond anything I've seen from Silicon Valley to Europe and Asia where I've worked. Another thing that's interesting too, in the genius side, it's not always reflected in something that is monetizable. We think about today, I think the oldest playing person or certainly with the most years in the NBA, or one of them is Udonis Haslem in the Miami Heat, 3-time NBA champion, just signed again for another year because Pat Riley's not letting him go because he is that leader for that team, even when he's not playing an instrumental role, etc. But I had the fortune of having a conversation with him, and he travels with us to the family offices from time to time to talk about his pet projects. And he's from Liberty City in Miami, which, for those that understand what the hood is like, he's deep in the hood. And so I'm like, okay, so I can imagine what you want to do in terms of community give back, etc. And he looks and he has the conversation. He says, yeah, all of that is true. However, but my pet project, I live in Miami. I want to save the whales. And I'm like, this is really interesting, because there's all types of things coming out of these physical bodies that I think is suppressing some geniuses and some messaging that you would never know and you would not expect. So in your situation, have you met any cases like that, or any thoughts around unpacking that type of genius?
Man, I mean, you bring up some hitters and some of the work that they're doing. And I think that the blanket statement that I'm going to make is that every athlete is a genius. It's just a matter of unlocking that and figuring out what you're passionate about. And I think that because of the way we position and pour all of our energy into athletics, sometimes we have walls that we have to break down until we can understand what we're really passionate about beyond that sport. So there's a couple examples that come top of mind, right? The first one is Matt Stover. Matt Stover was a kicker for the Baltimore Ravens. If you guys aren't familiar, he runs now a firm called Players Philanthropy Fund. So, one of the things that you hear about professional athletes doing is this give back to community. Mm-hmm. Well, let's be honest, a bunch of athletes, they're not always buttoned up on how 501(c)(3)s work, how to handle the finances and make sure that all the funds raised get allocated and we're buttoned up on our taxes. So I think there's power again in the community. And what Matt has done is created a platform for athletes to be able to go ahead and launch their nonprofits and alleviate the headache of doing all the back end work, having to deal with any of the finances. It's a turnkey solution. So I think that one to me is really powerful because it's helping people within the community now give them a vehicle to go ahead and do what they're passionate about.
Very interesting.
Second one, real quick, Bill, because I would be remiss without bringing him up, is Jed Collins. Now, Andre Merkin wrote in the comment about financial literacy. And I think that as athletes, whether male or female, we sometimes let our ego get in the way. And it's like, oh, you know what? I'll deal with that later. I got my guy. I got my woman to deal with this. No. Jed is now going back into the community and taking all of his leadership experience, and he talks about this principle. It's not his, but he talks about stealing inches. Bill, it's the coolest thing I think I've ever heard, right? So he was a fullback, and he said that I was evaluated in 6 inches. And he goes, so every day in the locker room or on the field, I would steal an inch. And he goes, that's how, that was one of the tools that I would use to go ahead and win those 6 inches on the day or on game day. Now take that off the field. Right? He goes, when I was in the locker room, I was stealing inches from all of these great leaders and all of these great coaches and players. And he goes, now I have a platform where I can go ahead and start to teach financial literacy in a relatable way. So, right at the beginning of the pandemic, he released the My Money Vehicle Challenge. And it's one of the most comprehensive yet digestible ways to go ahead and understand financial literacy. And he's a professional athlete, right? So he walked away from the game voluntarily and is now taking all those soft skills of leadership and communication and work ethic and now delivering it out to the masses in something that we direly need. So I think that's a great example, again, of just using the platform and the brand to teach something that's maybe not so sexy and fun to talk about.
Very interesting. So this just gets us to a place. You mentioned partnerships when you're having this discussion. I want to take that to the place where, as an athlete, and it doesn't have to be a professional athlete, but literally as someone that is disciplined, that's going through this journey and having multiple interests, whether it's artistic, whether it's business, but very often you've got to find the time and the effort to go about doing the business of that art or the business of the business that you want to launch. Mm-hmm. And very often that includes raising capital. As an athlete, do you think you're at an advantage or a disadvantage for raising capital? One of the things that I found with some of the athletes, there is a tendency to sometimes to stray away from being out in the forefront again after you've been out in the forefront, playing the sport, etc. There's the assertiveness that is on the field very often doesn't follow up into the other rooms that you may enter. As a result, one firm that's a friend of ours too is VPO that came up with a solution, and I don't know how much I can drill into their story without, but I want to share the high level of it, is that instead of going the formal route of Silicon Valley, raising capital through VCs, they leveraged their football network and had a product that let's say a dozen plus football players invested in, and now they've got a digital platform that they partnered with the NFL and teams, literally bringing a digital experience to the audiences as well. So I thought that was ingenious. It makes a whole lot of sense. What do you find that athletes are doing, and are they taking advantage of the notoriety of their personal brands and their networks they were able to build during that process?
So one word comes top of mind, and that's confidence. And I think so many athletes move in their world because practice makes permanent. So they don't have to think when they get on that field, and they move with this suave charisma and confidence where it's like, this is my world. So I belong here, and I know I belong here. And then I think that
Mhm.
capital world is like, well, okay, so I have a degree. And if you did make it to the professional level, maybe you haven't used that degree in 3, 4, 5 years. And so you feel a little outdated. And then you get into these venture talks or these, private equity firms, and they're using words and lingo. And I mean, it's like its own little jargon where you're like, I don't belong here. And so I think as you're going through that transition and your confidence is a little bit low because you've lost your identity, maybe, it's not my first propensity to go into a room where I'm really uncomfortable and feel outclassed, even though I know I'm not. So I think that it is going to be incumbent upon us who have now come out of the system that are sending the elevator back down to go ahead and say that we have to leverage the community of high net worth individuals, of movers and shakers that are all around these professional and college organizations that can help propel you. And one of the things that I've become really passionate about is engaging alumni networks, right? Because it's one of the areas where we as a community pay all of this money for an education. The school has no problem calling us for when it's time to donate again. But how often do you call on the school to leverage the alumni network? And I started asking guys that I played football with. I mean, Bill, I graduated in 2013. So we're going on 8 years removed from the program. And there's some guys that I hadn't talked to since the last time we put the pads on.
Right.
That's unacceptable, right? Because now you can be confident with Scott Garber. You can be confident with the guys that you were in the locker room with where you shared blood, sweat, tears. Why wouldn't you start there? And I think so much of that is the notion of a mind expanded never contracts. So these guys and gals just don't always know that avenue is there. But once we're able to go ahead and show them, and you use a VPO as an example to say, hey, here's a success story. We as humans, we know the term sheeple is there for a reason. So a lot will follow. Not a lot want to pioneer, but once we show it works, then I think we can get a big movement behind it. So that's some of the things that, through my conversation and my personal experience that I've noticed. But, Dave Meltzer said this when I was, chatting with him, and he was like, there is more capital out there than you know what to do with.
Right.
And there's a misconception around raising capital. Just because you go and raise money, it's not like you just put it in your pocket and they, that PE firm paid you and you're off on the races. And I think a lot of people in the athletic space don't even understand the nuances, what it means to go raise. So I think we have to remove the stigma of like, oh, I just raised $1 million, or I raised $5 million. Great, but why? Like, do you even know what you're doing? And I think we can start that education process a hell of a lot earlier. Because what I've learned, Bill, is that the strategy comes just as much from the firm that you partner with as much as the capital that you raise. And so we have to really put strategic lenses on this, not just the capital, raise lens as well.
Excellent. You created another segue when you talked about blood, sweat, and tears and the locker room. I will take the position that we need more locker rooms. And here's why. I think the relationship that you and I have built in a very short period of time is for the mere fact is that we understand what the locker room is and we're comfortable in that space and we learn to navigate the locker room. And what I mean by that is growing up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, I did not have true first contact or relationship with a person that wasn't Black because I was in a community of over 1 million Black people. Until I was an adult, effectively. And the locker room was that bridge that got me to understand other cultures, other ways of doing things, how to manage conflicts. Sometimes, as something like football is a little aggressive, and in a controlled environment, the coaches created a manner for us to work out what our differences are, and understanding after we go through all of that nonsense, understand what Sunday means. And this is what you've got to do, because at the end of the day, you guys are tethered. You're tied together to a string. You're each other's brothers. And if you don't, all of us are going to lose. So I think that's a very interesting point in time right now, and I certainly don't want to spend more than a minute on the social disruption that we're going through in the world, but with more locker rooms, with more locker room experiences. I'd like to know, what would your thought process be, or what it takes to get to know people that didn't grow up the same way that you did, getting comfortable, creating confidence, and being able to partner, win championships, and then move forward through life with people that look different than you do.
Sports is the great equalizer that runs parallel to life. So I reflect back on so many of the lessons that I've taken into the business world, that I've taken into my relationships. And those lessons curate from the locker room. And I think it teaches conflict resolution, and it teaches leadership, and it teaches you how to have a voice. Because if you don't have a voice, that gets picked up in the locker room as well. And so it's okay to be different, because you are collectively moving towards a goal together. And I think that's really what we've lost here, right? When you look at a sports locker room that goes awry, typically the culture gets talked about, not the players. You can have the best players in that locker room, but they're not all rowing in the same direction towards a common goal. And I'm going to bring up Bill Belichick, because Bill Belichick has done this and proven it time and time again, that you don't need a roster full of all 5-star athletes in order to go ahead and get the job done. You need a couple key players, you need a couple leaders, and then you need everyone to show up. And I know this is your show, but do your fucking job. Do your job. And I think that we have so many people right now with so much information at their fingertips, Bill, that they don't even understand their why, never mind their job. And so we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now. Everyone's trying to call orders, and it's complete chaos. And so I think back to my locker room, and there were a couple trusted voices that would say, hey, this sucks. And guess what? We sucked for the first 6 games. How are you going to be remembered? That's how I'm thinking about this right now. And I got to be honest, I'm embarrassed. If this is how we're going to be remembered, so also in the locker room, you know what you have? The haves and the have-nots. And it's not about your talent level, but at a point right now, are you going to lean in and embrace the challenge, or are you going to stick your tail between your legs and just sit there and point fingers? We have a lot of people pointing fingers right now. And I remember one of my quarterback, I actually just had him on, Ross Matheny. And he would say, I would take 11 guys that are leaning into this and play them on all 3 sides of the ball, then 53 of you knuckleheads who are pointing fingers, fighting, and just being divisive. And I think that our country, our society, and our sports ecosystem can really be refreshed by that message to say, you know what? There's no handouts in this world. And we play a game that keeps score, just like sports. So guess what? There's winners and there's losers. And I'm not going to have pity. In my locker room, Bill, there were guys that showed up from the hood, and there were guys that showed up from $5 million mansions. Guess what? When you got there, you're here. This is where we're at right now. I don't really care how you got here. What are you doing for me right now? And I think that we need to go ahead and sort of swallow that pill. And then one last thing, the locker room taught me how to be wrong. The locker room taught me how to shoot my shot, and it's okay to be wrong, because if you're wrong, you're trying, but then you have another chance to go ahead and try again. Instead of doubling down and disappointing the whole team over and over again, you typically tend to start to curb that behavior, or you get your ass off the team.
Good deal.
We need to swallow our own pill and say, hey, you know what? We've done things wrong. And that's okay, because we're all humans. So stop pretending like you're better than somebody else. But now we need to figure out something to unify us and row in the same direction. Sport could be that. I don't know what that is right now, but that's, to me, why I get up and do what I do every day.
And that's interesting, what you do every day. So we're at an inflection point, literally, in this country and in the world, with the pandemic, with the recession, with the digitization of everything that's occurring right now. And it's forcing us to not only unpack our genius, but to find some efficacy and get out of our comfort zones. We've all got to grow. So I'm taking a strategy, going a path, what is a traditional wealthy white male journey through a family office with investments, using institutional money as well as the money monies of the people that are in my ecosystem. You are sitting in a very interesting chair. I just watched another valuetainment presentation, which talked about who are the most powerful people in the world. The most powerful people in the world are the messengers, the ones that are doing podcasts and vloggers, and effectively they have usurped traditional media. Even in this case, they talked about educational institutions, the president of the United States. Literally, you're in the newest career, the newest position where, with a growing audience and an influential message, that you have the opportunity to influence the lives of a lot of other people. What has that been like for you, and what do you see for the future in this space?
Coaching. I'm going back to coaching, and I'm going to bring up my uncle. His name's Steve Noodleberg. So if anybody in my network is tuning in, they know this guy. And that's his little thing. But anyway, so Steve runs a daily huddle, and as we go through this, he's always been a couple years ahead. So I've been fortunate enough to watch my coach pioneer, go a different route. And when this was all going on, he said the barrier to entry is lower than it's ever been before. So it's your choice. It's literally your choice. And so I think the big media conglomerates did a great job sort of owning those channels. And so we're at still the early stage of this connectivity at scale like we have right now. And so Chucky Jacoby was on the show, and he said, look, you are the producer, you're the director, you're the critic. It is your world. You get to do whatever you want with it, right? So if I can take that mentality and now marry it with a very low barrier to entry to get that out there, you're your own worst enemy, right? So I just said, you know what? Like, I'm gonna shoot my shot here and let's see what happens. But I am gonna show up and be the most authentic, genuine version of myself. And if you like me, great. If not, good. Then we don't have to do business together. But at least it's sort of out there. This is who I am. Now, one thing before I go down this rabbit hole, everyone needs to know that last year for 4, almost 5 months, I went completely off the grid. I turned my phone off. You didn't see me on social media, anything. And so that perspective of clarity has really created a balance in the way that I engage being the messenger. And so I still feel like I have Scott Garber off the screen, but there's very much an authentic and genuine version when I show up here to drive movement public facing. And I think that everybody should have that moment where you realize your relationship with technology and ask yourself, are you controlling the technology or is the technology controlling you? And so I think that there has to be a responsible approach, even though the barrier to entry is very low. So to answer your question directly, the podcast game has been an absolute game changer for me for 2 reasons. One, people know who I am. Like, it is the craziest thing. But in 2020, it's not about who you know. It's about who knows you. And what a great way to get your message and thoughts out there and grow. 2, I'm actually going to add a third point. 2, Bill, it's made me a better listener. I feel like when you're live and engaging in conversation, it forces you to be present, and you have to use your 2 ears and 1 mouth in the most effective way. Because if you don't listen, you're not going to ask relevant questions. And then who cares? You're not good. You're not a good podcast. And then 3, it's put me in an arena to go ahead and say, Brandy Chastain, do you want to come and tell your story on my podcast? I never had a reason to talk to these folks before. And so now I can get them into my world. And after 45 minutes, I feel like I know them better than I know some of the people that I close the biggest deals with. And so it's forging real relationships. And so that, to me, when you can create that partnership again, that's where magic happens. And so, the entry funnel to my world is now the podcast. But now I have 4, 5, 6 different things lined up of value. So if an athlete comes in my world, well, guess what? You're going to meet Bill Davis, right? And guess what? When you meet Bill Davis, you're going to come join an event in the club room. And then when you go into the club room, now you're really going to, you need marketing, you need sales training. It doesn't matter. So you ultimately, going back to the hood, you become the plug. And that's what became that. And my drug is the podcast, and then once you taste it, you're gone. You don't want to leave, right? And so I took that same mentality and created myself as the plug. Now try and explain that to people that aren't in this world, Bill, and they look at you like you have 20 heads.
Very interesting. Listen, I would be remiss if I'm trying to create a theme of unpacking the genius if I didn't go down the track of understanding health and wealth right now. So we're learning a lot about mental health, physical health, particularly in the world of football. We've had some scares, some challenges. There's a lot on the horizon about maintaining the health of football players. Have you learned anything about this space that you can share with the audience with regard to particularly about physical and mental health?
So I'm on day 29 of my whole 30 challenge. And I take the approach of all of us have the ability to control certain things in our life that will produce and yield specific outcomes. And so there is more correlation. And I think I pay attention to the mind-body correlation more than I ever have before. And when you're able to go ahead and see people that have created a lifestyle around these certain elements, you can say then, hey, that's where I want to be, and this is the path to get there. And so Jimmy Ferris and his Be a Pro platform, Ford Dyke, Josh Perry, I mean, all of these folks spend their days understanding the mind-body relationship. And so as I look back on my playing days, I think that we become so comfortable in this post-athletic world. And one thing I want to change is, why does sport fall off as soon as you stop playing at a competitive level? And the pickup basketball games and dodgeball and pickleball and football, whatever that sport may be, we need to figure out a way where you can get that same release in that you get playing sport in your next phase of life. So that's one piece of it. The second one is, now in 2020, we are staring into screens more than ever before. And this is triggering dopamine hits, cortisol, and I want to impress this upon anybody listening, that if you want to use your phone, at the end of the day, the battery's dead. You have to plug it back in the charger, and you have to recharge that thing for X amount of time in order to get the output you want. We need to kill the notion that working more and sleeping less is the American dream, because we are single-handedly killing ourselves. And so I would encourage everybody to practice better sleep regimens. And if you think that if you're looking at this when you wake up or when you go to sleep, put it outside your room and see if the technology controls you or you control the technology. But it's amazing when you're able to have a healthy relationship with this tool, how the hormones in your body realign. And so that's something we don't know the long-term effects by staring into blue lights and into these screens. You'll notice I don't wear glasses, but these are blue light glasses. So there's little things that we can go ahead and adopt that might help us while we're still figuring that out. Hopefully that answers your question. We could spend a year on mental health, but one of the guests that brought me into this world, and I would be remiss without bringing him up, Eric Cusin. Everyone needs to go get behind this hashtag Same Here movement. His hashtag is 5 and 5, Bill, because everyone tells us on the mental health side, Skip Bayless included, we just saw this with Dak, that 1 in 5 suffer from mental illness. I don't know about you, man, but especially in 2020, 5 and 5 are going through it. Everyone's got their own shit. So let's stop pretending that we're all healthy and put together, and just embrace each other as humans, and just give someone a hug or send someone a random note, and you'll be amazed the impact that can have in someone's day.
Excellent. So I know we're a little over time. So I'm going to close with this one last point. And I'd like to hear what your thoughts are, particularly around where we are with name, image, and likeness. So knowing everything that you know today, And what a lot of people that watch professional sports don't understand, and particularly when they see athletes go to their favorite schools, et cetera, very often these athletes have multiple options. A lot of the athletes that I know, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, however, they want to play ball, so they choose Duke, North Carolina, and the popular programs, which effectively while they're 100% focused on what they're doing athletically, some of the other things that would have unpacked at the other institutions never got an opportunity to do. So if you, given the chair that you're sitting in now, if you had a chance to do it all over again, or advise slash coach a young person in high school that had a number of options, and they had the opportunity to control their own, let's call it their personal IP,
Yep.
what would you recommend that they do to prepare for the new world that they're entering today?
It's an incredible question, and I'm actually going to steer it in a direction you probably don't see this going. I think that it becomes imperative for young athletes to diversify and become relatable. And the more relatable you become, the more compelling your story becomes. So my biggest advice is start telling your own story really early and figure out where you want to get better, what you want to do, where you want this to go, and then start going and having experiences in life that are going to put you in an arena where you can now relate and communicate to the niches, right? Because I think you will have so much opportunity that the sport and the platform will provide you. If you don't even have a clue or a vision of what you want to do when that's over, then you're squandering it day by day. So I think one of the coolest things that NIL is going to do is it's going to erode the amateur floor, right? So what do I mean by that is now there's nothing stopping a middle school, a high school, a college athlete from creating a YouTube channel or a podcast to be the messenger and really identifying and communicating and building with industry experts where they want to go far beyond their football, hockey, soccer days. And so I think the more compelling of a story you can tell, the more relatable you are as a person, it really unlocks the key to becoming successful in whatever your passion is in this world.
Mm-hmm. Listen, well, I want to thank you for allowing me to interview you. I want to thank the audience for putting up with me. And listen, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for this switch. And any questions, please send messages, notes. I can be reached at a New Wall Street. Scott can be reached anywhere and everywhere. And we're just excited. And this was a great show. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Bill, and back at you, man. I mean, I don't think I could let you go without just re-emphasizing that, you know what, when genuine people connect, it doesn't take months, years. I mean, this thing spun up in weeks, and you held no bones back in saying, hey, let me interview you. And if you don't shoot that shot, you miss 100% of the ones you don't take. So this has been honestly one of the most humbling, enjoyable experiences to be on the other side of it. And, we're going to definitely keep this going, whether it's live and we just have sessions. We'll talk offline, but would love everyone's feedback in the comment section. And until next time, everybody, be sure to check yourself.